Welcome to another segment of Lore You Should Know. I am Greg Tito, and today I'm joined by Adam Lee. Hi, Adam.
Hello.
How is it going on this very spooky day, apparently?
It is, yeah. Actually, I'm in the Lost Caverns here, and as you can see my background, and we're fighting, the Bahir, so we're in trouble.
We are
we're
in
not
trouble.
Prepared for such a monster.
Well, we have some awesome subclasses in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything that might be able to help us in the fight. We're going to talk about two of them today: the Druid Circle of Stars subclass, as well as the Ranger's Fey Wanderer, and talk about the lore and kind of what kind of characters you can create with these subclasses in Tasha's. So, Adam, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Circle of Stars and what that's all about?
Yeah, the Druid Circle of Stars kind of came from, the inspiration of like megaliths and these druids that have throughout the ages tried to keep this sacred knowledge alive. And one of the ways they did that was they noticed patterns in the sky with the stars. Mm-hmm. And so those star patterns had some magical power. And so they encoded their magical powers into those patterns. And then they also took those and then they encoded it into megalithic sites. So, and the reason they did that was because, as say a place like Toril or the Faerun, these areas where there was a lot of magical, like, cataclysms over the centuries and eons, the world would be reshaped, whether it was by big monsters like the Dragon Giant Wars, or whether it was wizard battles that blew craters into the side of into mountains and all that, or if it was some other natural phenomenon or a war between the gods tore the planet's surface apart. So the Druids, knew that these things happened from time to time, that these wars and battles were cyclical, and that they, to sort of store all their knowledge, they had to either encode it in the sky, which seemed to never change, or they had to encode it into the ground, into the earth, into some massive structure that could withstand like a great flood or a wizard's battle or something like that. So these druids, the subclass itself, actually, the druid can embody. It can use constellation, the power of the constellations, and the cool thing is that you can sort of say if there's a constellation of the chalice, the druid can all of a sudden then bring that constellation into his or her body, and then the body shows up as like a constellation, like there are lines of energy. That kind of follow the arm, and then it like the joints are like stars, and so it's kind of this cool visual. But then that constellation itself gives that druid an ability or a magical power to like heal or to defend themselves with a shield. So it was a way of saying, like, you see the constellation of the shield in the sky, but it means more than that. That a druid of the Circle of Stars can actually say, hey, I can take that shield constellation and now use it to shield my body magically. So they can also, in the megaliths, they have this knowledge encoded as well. So, and it's kind of, it's kind of also mirrored in our own, sort of world. Like, why did people build these massive ancient sites and these big megaliths? It was like, well, there were a lot of, sort of through oral history, there were a lot of these tales about great floods and about cataclysms. And so these ancient people wanted to make sure that their knowledge, or that even just the evidence that they existed, carried on. So that was kind of the sort of, inspiration behind creating the Druid of the Circle of Stars. So.
That's pretty fantastic. I love the connection to our own history. I think Stonehenge and megalithic sites like that fascinate us because at one point you're thinking that they're just crude stone sculptures, but it wasn't until scientists and archaeologists and anthropologists started to realize that they aligned to star patterns and a calendar, that you realize that these, ancient peoples actually had a pretty sophisticated knowledge of the heavens and what they meant.
Yeah. I mean, the Aztecs, the Mayan calendar, like their mathematics was just so phenomenal, and was, some say that it's better for calculating, great distances of time, better than sort of our early mathematics was. And so, there's all this ancient sort of knowledge that's lost. Well, these druids, I think if somebody's playing one of these characters, I think using that inspiration to build your character and say that, my druid is a part of an ancient lineage, and it could go back, thousands of years.
Yeah.
And that maybe some of that knowledge is lost, but there's one key message and I think as a DM, having a player who's running one of those characters, it's great, because then you get to, have maybe a secret come through, like the adventuring party wanders through the forest and they stumble on an old moss-covered like site. And as they clear it away, they realize like, oh my gosh, this is an ancient stone circle. And the character who's the druid of the Circle of the Stars can then sort of read into it and say, oh, I understand this stuff. And it's pointing in a direction. It's pointing in a lost direction. And this is a key to a missing part of my order. And there you go. You've got your adventure right there. And it can be as small, like you just follow it and you find an old tomb of an ancient, a wise druid that's been buried with like ancient knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Or it can just be as small as that, like a one-off, or it could be this massive epic that it goes across worlds and it goes to other planes of existence, because these stone circles might not necessarily just show sort of linear dimension. It could go into 3 dimensions, or it could go into hyper dimensions, where this stone circle will point to some place on like Elysium, like it's going to another plane of existence. And
right.
It might take a druid some time to kind of process that out. But, it's like that cool, what movie was that? Was like Contact.
Yeah.
And, they take it and they're like looking at it and they're like, oh, this is all 3 dimensions. It's not a 2-dimensional thing. And, this star map is pointing into another galaxy. So,
and all it takes is another perspective to kind of bring that to light. And that character, the Circle of Stars druid, could be that new perspective.
Yeah. If a DM saying, like, how do I get my players from Faerun to, Planescape? Or how do I get my characters from Faerun to, the Mount Celestia? It's like, okay, if they've got a druid of the Circle of Stars in the party, it's like that character can be now a key. And it, would give that character, sort of like a main sort of like pillar of the story to serve as, they're unlocking this great grand mystery.
Talk a little bit about the star map and how that figures into all of this as a physical object, but also something that can, help your character.
Yeah, so the star map's kind of like it acts as a druid's focus, and then they can use that to cast spells and to, sort of like, get their, power, or it can also, the DM can use it to sort of like, they've got their spell focus and all that, but then the DM's like, oh, but your star map, actually, if it's, it could have another magical property to it. So if it's a paper map, they could put it up overlay it onto something else, and then everything lines up. And when it does, then it unlocks a door. Or if it's like the star map's like a crystal or something, or, then they could put it in as a key. But cool. Yeah, that star map sort of helps the druid sort of access their spells and access their power. Yeah,
and it can be a focus for their spells, but also just a focal point for their knowledge, right? Like this is the codex of the stars, of what they know so much about the constellations, and it's all in this physical object. It also strikes me that it's a great tool for dungeon masters to world build. If your player chooses the Circle of Stars just because they think it's cool, or because they want to delve into some of this lore, dungeon masters can use it as a way to kind of expand their world building, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the fun thing about is they're these powers from the constellations. So I think in the book you've got like the chalice, and let's see what else. I've got
the archer here, and the dragon.
Yeah, the archer and the dragon. So it's like these are cool spells or cool constellations that you can use in images. But let's say the DM wants to make up their own, and that's one of the things I love about this subclass is that it builds in, and it's kind of the same with the there's another subclass in here called the Rune Knight. It allows the DM to I can now build stuff into that subclass. Like I can build a bunch of different cool new like constellations that have different powers and that are themed to my adventure. So if my adventure is about you're going into let's say you're taking a trip into Celestia, and then there's this sort of you go there and you see a whole different set of constellations on Mount Celestia, and you can look up in the sky and you can see like the Solar or the Kirin or the Coatl, and you're like, oh crap, can I access those constellations and what do they do? And so as a DM and as a world builder, you can say, all right, now I get to write in what are these celestial powers that you get when you access those constellations. And I think that's a lot of fun. It's and it can be like a quest thing for a character who's a druid. Like, hey, if you go to this area, there are all these other constellations that will give you new powers. And so if you go to another realm, it's like kind of if you're on the northern hemisphere, you see all the constellations that we see. But if you go to the southern hemisphere, you see like the Southern Cross and other constellations that we never see. It's like, the druid would do that and would now gain all these different powers.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, see, I was thinking about it's a bit of a trope in fantasy where you go to a new place and you're like, I don't recognize these stars. Like these stars, like that's more jarring sometimes than, meeting different people or eating different foods or all that stuff. You're just like, look, I'm in a completely different place because I'm not familiar with these constellations. I could be on as I said, another plane of existence or a whole nother world. And so that might be a nice act 2 for, levels 10 and up for your Circle of Stars Druid is now they have to find out what the powers and stories are for all these new constellations.
Yeah, I think that would be, a really interesting thing. Like, that's the thing. Like, I think being a DM that gets into that on that level, like for each of your players that has chosen a class, they're choosing that class for, their own reasons, and to then fulfill, like that player's like ultimate joy, which is like, now we're going to make your class really matter in the adventure, that let's say maybe to go to a different plane of existence and now they don't have access. I mean, I don't think we state in the book that if you don't see the constellation in the sky, you lose that ability. I think once the constellation's on your star map and you have that focus, then you can actually embody that constellation. But let's say, for instance, you lose your star map, and can you then still use that? So then how do you, if you're in another location and you have all these other new constellations, like then you've got to kind of pick out the patterns and make that pattern, or go to somebody who is like an astronomer, and you kind of go to a temple and you find this astronomer, and the astronomer is going to tell you all about the different constellations and their powers. And then you sort of somehow draw a new star map, and now you've got access to this whole new suite of cool constellation powers, which is super fun.
I love that. I love that as game designers. Basically, this book is a jumping off point into designing more.
Yeah, totally. It's like, try your own hand at it, which is, I think, is a really cool thing about this subclass, and I think also the Rune Knight, where this fighter subclass has access to all these runes of power. Now you can use that in like your giant adventure, like you're going to play Storm King's Thunder. Has all the giant runes and stuff, and then it's like, okay, well, we've given you a few in Tasha's about like what those runes do. But man, there are so many runes in D&D. There's just so many, and then awesome like real world runes that you can play with. Like, whatever you want to do and whatever those runes mean. And then, so then as you're going through and you're fighting giants, and then you see you do a good deed for a giant, and the giant's like, I'll bestow upon you this rune, and it's like, oh my gosh, now I got this, I can, my sword does now 2d8 more damage or something cool.
Yeah, exactly. That's pretty cool. And even going to another plane, as we've been talking about with the Fey Wanderer Ranger subclass, they have that ability to go to other worlds, right?
Yeah. So the Fey Wanderer is a ranger that through some, maybe they, took a walk. They were a regular ranger one day, and they took a walk in the woods, and the woods kind of got weird. And then there was a Fey crossing, and they kind of went through into the Fey Wild, and then met an Archfey and were Fey touched that way. Maybe they went over into the Fey Wild and were like, some Fey creature offered them like an apple or a cake, and they were like, "Ooh, this is delicious," and they ate it, and then came back and they were like, "Whoa, you're never supposed to eat stuff in the Fey Wild, man!" Like, and now they're having it's kind of changed the way they operate, but. Because of this, the Fey Ranger now has these abilities that has affected them, and it makes them more sort of Fey-like. Like, I think they gain a lot of access to like Misty Step and Charm, but as they go up in power, then they get access to like really powerful spells like let's see, what are some of the good ones, like Mislead and Dimension Door. So they can shift and do things that powerful Fey beings can do naturally. So it gives them this kind of Fey quality to it. And as a player, depending on like how the player wants to sort of incorporate that into their character, they can have their character be like already they've experienced the Fey Wild and they're just super like unfazed by it. In fact, you probably want, if you go to the Fey Wild, you want to take a Fey Wanderer Ranger with you because there are so many rules and so many different ways things can go wrong in the Fey Wild. If you don't know what you're doing and you don't know how to deal with the creatures there, they can also run their character in a different way where they're just getting like a sense of their abilities, and they're still kind of like a fish out of water, but in both worlds, which I think would be kind of a fun way to run a character. It's like they've been touched by the Fey Wild, and so they're not really quite comfortable in the material plane. They feel weird. Everything's kind of just different. They're seeing stuff. But when they go into the Fey Wild, they're still enough of an earthling like that they don't feel very comfortable in the Fey Wild as well, but they're starting to learn stuff. And maybe like in that world, they encounter like a Fey who says like, I see that you've been Fey touched, and now come with me and I'll show you the ways, and you could have that kind of a situation happen.
I like that. Fish out of water in both cases, those are some of my favorite characters. I like to play a half elf for that reason. It basically this Fey Wanderer is half elf to a T, really, because of how it's been Fey touched, but also of the material plane. But I gotta say, my favorite part of this subclass is the non-mechanical Fey Wild gifts that give either fluttering butterflies or flowers sprouting from your face or hair, changing of color of skin. I love those very descriptive class features in here.
Yeah, and it's like these are like pretty much all the tables in here are like little jumping off points that we put in to get your brain going of like, here's the themes of what's going on, and then a player or a DM who's like, I've got a great idea for your Fey touch character, and you kind of talk with the player and say, it would be cool if maybe this happened, and it means something later on in your adventure, that because you have this kind of sort of Fey Wild gift, but then you kind of learn why that Fey Wild gift was given to you. I think that's a neat thing. I mean, and a good DM can sort of get one of these and riff on it, and just be like, oh, okay, that's cool. Now I can pull that thread and find something neat. Like you eventually meet an Archfey that gave you that gift.
Right.
And a neat thing would be like a Fey Wild Wanderer who, doesn't necessarily know how it happened to them, as opposed to a Fey Wild ranger who does know how it happened to them. Like they did something and they met an archfey and they made a deal, and they're like, I got to get out of the Feywild. I've got to get back to my family or something. And the archfey was like, well, I'll do that to you. I'll make you that. I'll make a portal for you to go out, but you've got to do this thing for me. You've got to dedicate your life to protecting the Feywild, let's say.
Right.
And that's the thing about the Feywild is that it's one of the other places in the multiverse where deals are made. Like the Nine Hells is one place where deals are made. As we kind of did it in Avernus, Descent into Avernus, it's like devils make deals. They're trying to get your soul. They're trying to
But the Fey are also very in that same milieu, maybe even tricking you into a deal that you didn't know you were being, similar to the way devils work.
And the interesting thing about the Feywild is that unlike devils who are bound by law, like you have to sign a contract, you have to do these things. The Fey don't have that. The Fey are, beings of chaos. And so they're not bound by this multiversal, like if a devil breaks a contract, they are now in breach of multiversal law, and it'll either be an archdevil will come in and put the beat down on them.
I'm a barrister of interplanar law, multiversal law. That's what you said, multiversal.
Yeah, they will come and they will do it, and they'll take great relish in it. It'll be like the highlight of their day if they can just put a smackdown on somebody who's broken the law. Or if nobody takes, like everybody wants to distance themselves from it, then actually like a merit from Mechanus, like it's a giant, super powerful Modron. That thing Primus will unleash that thing, and that thing will track the breacher of that contract down and make them comply. It's basically like an Ed 209 or a 2000, whatever from RoboCop.
Yeah, it
will make you comply. It will just hunt you down. But
in the Feywild, that's not the same. That's not that way, right?
No. So it's kind of like it's a verbal agreement, or it could be like, give me a drop of your blood, or let me, I'll clip a lock of your hair, and if you agree to it, it's almost like it's a verbal agreement or a sort of like a agreement of an exchange. But there's other weird things, and it's kind of a slippery slope. Like DMs have to make it so that players, don't feel completely cheated by the Fae. Like if they're down there, that the deal has to be sort of obvious enough that everybody's kind of in agreement. Like, okay, we're agreeing to this. But technically, you can actually, like if you go into the Feywild and let's say you eat a fruit. A Fae could be like, now you've entered into a deal with me.
Yeah.
You ate a fruit from my orchard, and anybody who does that now owes me something.
And that could have happened to the Fey Wanderer character. It could have happened to their ancestor too, right? And so they might be trying to find that out.
Yeah, this could be an ancestral inheritance. Like, your ancestor made a deal and said, well, and the Fae said, well, the fifth generation of the fifth generation is going to be, touched by me and will become, sort of like my guardian or my champion. And now you're that one.
And you've got all these great abilities, but now you got to figure out how to perhaps undo this or make good on the deal and pass it on or not to your progeny.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing. I mean, being a Fey Wanderer is badass. It's great. You've got cool stuff. You know things. It's just a matter of how you want to play it as a player, and agreeing with your DM and saying, hey, I want my Fey Wanderer to be completely cool, like Aragorn in the Feywild. Or you could play it like, I want this to be kind of a curse. Like my character never asked for this, but these things are happening to my character and it's transforming her into like this new sort of thing. And she's resisting it at first, but then like, she's like, oh, I get it. I didn't have the full picture. And now you've entered into this sort of Fey Wild adventure where there's, wars going on, or there's battles between the Seelie and Unseelie, and you've got to figure it out. And, the rest of your party's involved in whatever, way they're involved. But the Fey Wanderer kind of plays a key role in being able to navigate sort of like the cultural differences in the Fey Wild, and also being kind of that key character in the sort of the conflict, and ultimately discovering why they were made into a Fey Wanderer in the first place. So yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
What I love about this discussion so far is that, obviously we're talking about the subclasses of this of Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which has a lot of mechanics and rules and bits in it. But this entire conversation has been all about the story, about these subclasses and how you can get it into your game, and that's fantastic. That's what Dungeons & Dragons is all about. And thank you so much for your work and all the work on the team by putting so much story and lore in this book that is, technically a mechanical book. It's so great to see them meld together. So kudos to you and the team, and I'm excited for everyone who has been picking up Tasha's Cauldron of Everything and jumping into these subclasses and many more, which we'll get to on future segments. So, Adam, how can people get in touch with you, perhaps ask you about the Circle of Stars or the Fey Wanderer?
Yeah, I'm at Adam of Adventure on Twitters. And I'm always on standby for any questions. And also, I love to hear about how people have used these in their stories. And, it doesn't even have to be questions, just like, hey, this is a cool thing that happened in our adventure. I love hearing about that stuff because that's what makes me do what I do and enjoy the work that I do. So hearing about how people have used their imaginations to make these stories come to life, that's what it's about.
For sure.
Love it.
Fantastic. And I can't wait to see butterflies flying on your head, because I'm pretty sure you're a Fey Wanderer in real life.
Yeah, I'm going to get a zoom back around that does it.
Right. We'll take you out
in real life. Yeah.
Remove the Bahir and put in a butterfly. All right. We're good.
I will. Yeah.